96% of us aren't meeting our recommended amount of fibre. The brain is the CEO of the body. Every surface we touch is microbial.
My guest today is Dr Emily Leeming, scientist at King's College London with a PhD in gut health.
What's so great about the gut microbiome is, unlike our genes, we can change our gut microbes. We just do not have the evidence yet to be giving personalised advice.
She's a dietitian, a former chef, a TEDx speaker, and author of 2 pivotal books in the gut health space.
How can we change it for our health? What are the key actions we can take?
So what's the proper way to poo?
Proper way to poo is...
Her work sits right at the interface between microbiome research and real life.
But you might not have any symptoms and yet still have kind of some different problems in terms of the function of your gut. There's a lot of chat about probiotics. Save that money.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Vision of Health, the podcast where I talk to qualified experts about what being healthy really looks like in everyday life and how your daily habits can help you feel well today whilst also protecting your long-term health. I'm Dr Frankie. I'm a medical doctor specialising in cancer research, and my mission is to bridge the gap between the science and real life, helping you make sense of the evidence in a realistic and sustainable way without falling victim to trends and fads. So whether we're talking about nutrition, sleep, gut health, movement, mental health, or longevity, this podcast is here to help you build your vision of health. I'm Dr Frankie, and this is my Vision of Health. Gut health has gone from a niche topic that was barely mentioned when I was at medical school to a global obsession in a matter of years. We're told to reset our gut, test our microbiome, take specific probiotics, eat 30 plants a week, but it's hard to know what's actually backed by the evidence and what's just hype. In this episode, we unpack what a healthy gut actually looks like, how the gut-brain axis works, whether you need to test your gut microbiome, and what everyday habits make the biggest impact when it comes to digestion, mood, and long-term health. If you've ever wondered how much of GutTok to actually believe and what you can practically do to support your gut health each day without obsessing over it, then this episode is for you. Dr Emily Leeming, welcome to Vision of Health.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you. I want to really get into what is real evidence for gut health and what is hype. Gut health is everywhere right now, and I just want to really clear up what is real and what's hype, because when I was at medical school 10 or so years ago, it wasn't really a thing. It was this emerging body of evidence, and now it's everywhere. What is actually grounded in good science?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's usually a kind of facet, a kernel of truth, and then quite often it can get kind of polished up, shined, and made into something perhaps bigger or kind of not true than what it is. And I think that can make it really confusing for people, because what's so great about the gut microbiome is, unlike our genes, which we can't change, we can change our gut microbes. So it's kind of a very new thing that we can take an action on for our health. But it's also got to be couched in that the fact that, as you say, it's a very new science. It's newly developing. Clinicians aren't necessarily trained in it because it is so new. Mm-hmm. And I think just to kind of put that into kind of context, in 2000, we had about 85 papers, if you kind of searched microbiome, microbiota. We've had about 250,000 papers since then. So that's the last 25 years. So really this amazing kind of escalation of microbiome research. So we know a lot more, but it's still that kind of very new, exciting, connecting the dots. Who's who? What are they doing? How does it work? And also, most importantly, how can we change it for our health? What are the key actions we can take?
And I think that's so true with science and research that I don't think gets well portrayed to the public, is that evidence changes. So we can know a little bit about something, and then in a few years, what we thought we knew can change, and we learn so much more. And often the headlines get picked up when it's in that infancy and it gets expanded. And sometimes we have these theories that don't necessarily translate into day-to-day clinical benefit. But gut health seems to be one that isn't just a trend and is something that actually we should care about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this new, we call it the forgotten organ, because it was never really acknowledged, and now it's really recognised as being this key cornerstone for health. And it's, as you say, it's very much here to stay.
So how would someone actually know if they have good gut health or poor gut health?
Well, this is a difficult question, because what is gut health really? And I think at the moment we really refer to gut health in the kind of last decade or so as talking about the gut microbiome. That's what we talk about in terms of the public. And when I say the gut microbiome, I mean like these trillions of tiny living organisms that live in your gut. These we shorten to calling microbes, and they can include bacteria, yeast, viruses, and they're this kind of like thriving ecosystem that have made their home in your lower intestine, and they are making molecules for your health. Your gut starts in your mouth, and it's this tube that goes all the way down through your stomach, through your intestines, down to your bum. And there was actually a consensus from a panel of experts that were really trying to say, well, what is gut health? What is a healthy gut? And they really kind of signpost that it's not just about the gut microbiome, which is important. Yes, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's very much about how well does your gut work overall? How is your digestion, your gut-brain connection, your hormones, your immune system, that all have a kind of impact on your gut. Whether your disease is not in an active state, if you have a condition or disease. So it's not to say that if you have, for example, inflammatory bowel disease, that you have quote unquote poor gut health. If it's in a kind of remission in terms of it's not an active state. And then also looking at symptoms. So somebody might have gut health symptoms, and that might be then a problem that maybe needs to get sorted out. But you might not have any symptoms and yet still have kind of some different problems in terms of the function of your gut. So it's really those kind of key things. How well does your gut work? Are you having any symptoms? And that's really, if you're not having either of those things, only nothing's coming up, that is the sign of a healthy gut. So there's not really any kind of hard and fast rules around how do we determine what that is. When we talk about the gut microbiome, we tend to say a healthy gut microbiome is one that has a lot of different types of microbes in it. So it has a wide range of predominantly bacteria, the ones that we talk about. And really got to think about that almost like a forest. You want to have lots of different plants for it to be thriving. And you want to have shrubs, you want to have vines, you want to have kind of large tall trees, maybe some moss on the ground. And all those are going to make a kind of nice, friendly environment that are then going to do things in terms of your microbes. It's going to be a happy place to do things for your health.
So how do I know that I've got a diverse gut microbiome with all of those different plants and shrubs and things? Do I need to test it?
So a lot of people think that they should do a microbiome test. I'm definitely in the camp where I say, look, they're really expensive. Really, if you're going to do a microbiome test, you've got to understand what you're going to get out of it in terms of what is realistic and what you can understand from it, but also where we're just not quite there in terms of the science. So if you're going to do a microbiome test and you want to know what the diversity of your gut microbiome is and you want to know who's there, and it's just like maybe a little bit of fun, a little bit of interest to be like, oh, that's interesting, I've got these microbes, then yeah, you absolutely can do it if you want to splash, a couple of £100 and you've got that. I would say it's not really anything that's going to give you anything valuable in terms of making changes for your health. We had a consensus from 69 experts across 18 countries that came out last year. And what those experts said pretty unanimously is that we just do not have the evidence yet to be giving personalized advice. And that might be dietary advice, that might be supplements, that might be medication, making any kind of condition or disease specific suggestions. It's very much a kind of early evolving area. So in terms of that kind of direct to consumer testing, not going to be giving you the benefits that you need. And I'd really say save that money, put it on maybe spending a little bit more on making healthy eating a little bit easier, or if you're having gut health issues, go see a dietitian, whether that's through the NHS or if you're able to afford it privately.
So for anyone who's thinking about turning this conversation off because they don't get bloating, lucky them, they have regular bowel habits and they think, my gut's fine, I have no symptoms. Why should someone care about their gut if they don't have any symptoms?
We're really shifting beyond thinking that your gut microbiome is simply just this kind of part of your digestion factory in your gut, to really recognizing that it is a cornerstone of your whole body health. It's, gut health as being foundational for whole body health. And what I mean that is that those molecules in particular that your microbes are producing, they, effectively think about them feeding on certain elements of the components in the foods that you eat. And then they make these molecules for your health. Now, these molecules don't just stay in your gut and help to look after your gut. They act as kind of batteries for your kind of charging your the cells lining your gut, and they help with kind of inflammation in the gut as well. But they are also absorbed across that gut barrier lining and travel across your body. And they're effectively visiting different parts of your body and really helping with your overall health. And this is why we're really seeing this connection between the gut and the skin, the gut and the brain, the gut and the heart, the gut and the liver. It's really this kind of portal into the rest of your body and having an influence that way.
Absolutely. One thing I'm really interested in is I read some studies because I work in cancer medicine, and they have basically shown that people who respond to certain cancer treatments, like immune therapy, cancer drugs, may have different microbiome makeups than someone who doesn't respond, and that actually doing a fecal microbiome transplant, so taking poo from one person's bowel into and putting it in another person's, can help improve cancer responses. So I always say to people, you need to care about your gut health, because if it's influencing how you respond to cancer drugs, it's doing a whole lot more than just affecting your digestion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an area of science that is just continuously evolving and so exciting to see. I mean, these poo transplants with, kind of rich in microbes have been used for an infection called C. difficile, which is this kind of very awful it's diarrhea, but times 1,000, and can be really, problematic and dangerous. And effectively, you can have, by doing these microbiome transplants, a kind of 95% resolution rate. And they're now looking at, as you say, is this something that we can use as a tool in helping to support people through kind of cancer therapies, but also looking at other conditions like inflammatory bowel disease. There's some really interesting research in whether doing kind of fecal microbiota transplants is like a supporting therapy for ulcerative colitis. And that could be something that, we see more of in the future. It's very early days in terms of that. And I think also it goes down to, we've really got to think about, if we've got all these connections with the body in terms of your gut microbiome, what does it mean by taking someone else's poo? What do we not know yet in terms of what might be kind of transferred? And so there's a really long list of kind of checks if you're a donor for these poo transplants, in terms of, have you got a history of depression? Have you got other conditions that we need to kind of worry about? And this is completely, non-scientific, but somebody in a kind of newspaper article talking about how he had inflammatory bowel disease, and he was taking poo samples from his mother, and he really thought that he was experiencing menopausal symptoms.
Wow.
So again, not rigorous science. I want to be really clear as a scientist. That's like one person saying that. But I think it's something that we have to be really cautious of in terms of doing this. So it's really not at home procedure. It's something that, but very interesting insights.
You often refer to the gut as the second brain, particularly I think that's what your newsletter is called. Why do you think that is the best way to describe the gut?
I feel like it really puts emphasis on the fact that the gut is so much more than what we've really recognized it for, and that it's kind of influencing the body in many different ways. I think we so know that the brain is the CEO of the body, and it kind of tells many of the other parts of our body what to do. But the gut's really just been seen as something that you eat, it gives you nutrients, and then, you go to the loo and do a number 2, and that's it. Whereas actually we have this kind of web of nerves that's kind of encased all around, pretty much kind of webbed around our gut. And these have kind of nerve signals that will ping messages to other parts of your body, and particularly talking to your brain in many ways. There's a long wandering nerve called the vagus nerve, which kind of connects your brain directly with your gut and other parts in your upper body. And this is pinging messages back and forth like this kind of direct highway. It's kind of like the kind of quickest WhatsApp messages between your gut and your brain. And kind of 80% of that communication is really coming from your gut to your brain rather than to your brain to your gut. So there's constantly a conversation happening there. And I think in a way saying second brain, it's showing how much communication is going on, and that there is a lot more to it, which I think is... we need to kind of recognise it and give it a bit more kudos.
I think for anyone wondering how that shows up, I know that when I'm nervous for something, I get physical symptoms. And I'm sure lots of people listening have experienced that when you're nervous, you're preparing for something, and suddenly you need to run to the bathroom, or you get those feelings of butterflies in your stomach. Is that part of the gut-brain axis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we're talking about these things, there's this really exciting emerging science as we see that the microbiome, it's been the last, 20, 25 years, this gut-brain connection, and particularly the microbiome part of that, has really been perhaps the last kind of 10, 15 years. But actually, we've been talking about the gut-brain connection in our everyday language for always. We talk about gut instincts, having butterflies, feeling kicked in the stomach, feeling sick to our gut. All these words that we use are really kind of highlighting how we already recognize that there's this powerful connection. And now we're kind of piecing it together in terms of the science. Okay, well, what's talking to what, and how are the microbes involved, and what's happening there. And as you say, when you're feeling stressed, it's like for some people, they need to run to the bathroom because that connection is so powerful that they're either got diarrhea, or for some people, they've got constipation.
So does stress cause temporary changes on the gut microbiome, or can chronic stress actually damage our gut health?
So temporary stress, I think stress gets a lot of a bad name, but really temporary stress is, although that might have an impact on your gut symptoms, it's not going to cause any long-term problems. And actually a little bit of stress, particularly for your brain, is really a good thing. It helps you perform well in tests. If you're doing a presentation at work, it's going to help you do well in terms of that. But I really like to think of stress a bit like a train on a train track, where it can go faster if needed, but then it slows down and it goes back to kind of normal kind of speed, and then it's kind of chugging along. What's happening with long-term stress is that the train isn't really designed to go at high speed all the time. And so that track starts to kind of wear down a little bit. Maybe there's some sparks going. And this is where we start seeing what we call kind of pro-inflammatory molecules getting kind of released into the body. And then this is a kind of slight wear and tear. There's kind of baseline inflammation that can happen from just stress staying kind of constant and elevated for a long period of time. We see that people who kind of highly stressed, that there's potentially this shift in their gut microbes. And particularly when we look at like models of mice, which is where a lot of the research is in terms of the microbiome, just to understand what is causing what. Mice that were stressed for a kind of period of a couple of weeks, those changes kind of stayed in terms of their microbiome. But of course, we're not mice, so it's quite hard to translate that to real life. And I think also it's very difficult to say, yeah, we'll avoid stress. I mean, life is stressful. So I really kind of end up kind of shifting to being like, how can we manage stress? So yes, the train can go faster, but can we find ways to kind of just bring it back to an even speed?
I like to tell people that there are stresses we can control and be aware of, and stresses we can't control. So things in our day like rushing in the morning, or waking up to an alarm, or doing your workout without eating, they're things we can control that are causing stress in our body. Whether you have a conflict at work or a tight deadline, slightly out of your control, but control the controllables.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure us working in academia are very familiar with how to manage stress. How strong is the evidence that links gut health to brain health over time? Are we talking about mood and cognition and our kind of thinking day to day, or does our gut health influence our long-term brain health, like dementia risk?
Yeah, so I think the way to really properly answer this is almost to look at this through two lenses. So in terms of talking about food, if you think about that as an aspect of what we eat as being kind of gut health, then we have, really kind of growing evidence that there is a connection between our dietary patterns and that having an impact on particularly kind of clinical depression. There was a landmark study in 2014 by Professor Felice Jacka, the SMILES trial, that showed that for people who have clinical depression, putting them onto a Mediterranean diet, 30% of them went into remission. So they weren't kind of considered to have clinical depression anymore. And we've had like a number of kind of stringent trials since then that have shown quite similar results. In terms of things like Alzheimer's disease, for example, and cognitive impairment, What we're really seeing is what the research seems to be suggesting is that these diseases are starting way earlier before any kind of symptoms might be appearing later in life. And actually, that's a time when we might be able to make the biggest impact in terms of what we eat and our lifestyle changes on our then kind of brain health risk for later in life. So it's really stopping someone kind of falling into the river rather than kind of using that as a kind of tool once they've got Alzheimer's, for example, to get out as a kind of less impact. So we've got kind of a number of studies that show this relationship between kind of food and Alzheimer's risk.
Wow.
Also signals with Parkinson's disease as well, but very much that kind of early window that we all need to be thinking about brain health now. In terms of the gut microbiome, again, through the fact that it's a new science, we're starting to see that it's part of this puzzle of how this is all kind of connecting the pieces. We see that people with Alzheimer's disease and depression and these kind of neurodegenerative diseases and conditions tend to have a different microbiome to those who don't have them. We see that they have lower levels of what we call short chain fatty acids. This is a particular, special group of molecules that are made by your microbes, particularly when they feed on a component of food called fibre, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. And we also see through mice studies that, for example, a group in Ireland did what they called, a paper was called Transferring the Blues, where they took a group of people who had clinical depression, transplanted their gut microbiome, their poo transplant, into the guts of rats. And they found those rats were then exhibiting kind of symptoms that were kind of similar to depression. So less interaction with others, more kind of social isolation. So really kind of showing that it's not perhaps just a symptom of maybe what's happening, that you've got changes in the microbiome. It's that there's perhaps an actual action happening from those microbes as well that's contributing.
I love what you said there about now is the time to think about this, because anyone who's maybe zoning out and thinking, I don't need to think about this right now, this whole podcast and everything I talk about are the lifestyle changes you can make today when you feel well that are protecting our long-term health. And I just think it's important to validate that in our head, because some of these changes that are going on with our gut health, as a great example, you can't see the benefit. But I hope conversations like this help people trust that they're happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're getting also kind of increasing some research of just looking outside of just a disease state and really recognizing that your health is also how you feel on a day-to-day basis. And I think even just tapping into little things like, okay, if we see this relationship with mood, might that then be a kind of something that is going to help me on the day-to-day, because everyone's kind of on the spectrum in terms of their mood, kind of whether you might not be in a clinical condition, but maybe there's something that's having an influence there. Likewise with your energy levels and your focus, and how like great you feel day-to-day. All these things are kind of, food plays a role in that, whether it's just having a balanced breakfast and making sure that you're kind of hitting those food groups.
Couldn't agree more. We're not just talking about preventing disease here. We're talking about feeling well for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And that is certainly very high on my priority list. So we've covered why people need to care about gut health and why this is not just hype. It is genuinely something that underpins our overall health. I would love to talk about some things that are quietly damaging our gut health. What's one small everyday habit that quietly destroys people's gut health over time?
I would say it depends. Maybe people aren't doing this every day, but I think we're really recognizing the impact of alcohol on both your gut and your brain. There was a small study that looked at giving people about the equivalent of kind of 2 vodka cocktails. And they saw that even just from those two vodka cocktails, that over the kind of span of a day, there was still kind of signals that perhaps there was some kind of slight inflammatory markers kind of coming through, and there was kind of elevated, and that perhaps there's this kind of impact on the gut microbes that are potentially then causing cells in the cell wall of your gut barrier lining to maybe become a bit more leaky, which is not always necessarily a problem. But in this case, it seemed that then there was this kind of translocation of maybe some microbes into the bloodstream and where they shouldn't be. And then, this kind of elevated inflammation, and just like little signposts like that, where we're thinking that actually a little bit of alcohol maybe, and you're having it on a consistent, regular basis, not so great for your health. And same for your brain health. Really interesting recent studies from the kind of biobank showing that even a small amount of alcohol is kind of associated with kind of a less healthy brain. But I think we've really got to catch that in context of like the real person. Because I think if you're having alcohol at home, maybe that's something that maybe you could switch out if you're just having it on your own. But if it's something that you're doing and it's helping you be more social, and actually you're getting lots of microbes by interacting with different people, you're hugging, you're sharing a meal, and it is a social lubricant. So I think it's not to say that it's necessarily a recommendation, but I think we've got to be realistic that we're real human beings and kind of how can we navigate that without going completely cold turkey if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think I'll admit I have the odd glass of wine in a social environment, but I'm really now conscious of having that random one with dinner just because it's the thing to do. Now I really check in being like, do I actually want to drink that glass of wine tonight if I'm out for a meal or something? And half of the time it's no. I was just doing it out of habit. And now I'm much more conscious because I have that awareness of the gut microbiome effects or the effects on fat loss or the effects on my sleep. I really see that through wearing my Whoop band. So I think that's the great way, you know, we're not saying cut it out completely if you don't want to, but just having the awareness that it's doing more than getting you drunk or not. Almost everyone, and I'll admit I'm the same, takes their phone to the loo. Is that just a funny cultural shift, or is this genuinely problematic for our pelvic floor, our bowel habits, our gut-brain function?
I think if it's one of those things as well, when if we're not paying attention to what our body is doing, and this could be, you know, the same when we talk about kind of mindful eating, right? It's like we're taking time to just be present in our body, and we need to be paying attention to what our signals is telling us. If we're just kind of mindlessly scrolling, whether it's on the loo, whether it's at the table, whether we're kind of eating at our desk, those are all times where we're not being in tune with what's happening in our body. And for some people, that might just not be a problem over their lifetime. I'm not going to say that it's like the worst thing in the world, but for others, it might just be that then, you know, if you've already struggling with constipation, maybe that's going to take you a bit longer and it's going to be even harder because you're just not kind of telling, your body's not like, oh, hello, this is what's happening at this time. It's like, oh, this is a time when I'm just going to be scrolling and having fun. I'm not paying attention that I actually need to be kind of pushing and things be happening. So yeah, it's one of those things that ideally, if you can just...
So what's the proper way to poo?
Proper way to poo is, if you can, get yourself a poo stool. I mean, that's really what we want to be doing. Especially if you're having problems going to the loo, what we do is when we sit on the loo, and if your kind of knees are kind of lower than kind of the rest of where your bum is effectively, that can mean that your kind of last bit of your pipe of your kind of gut, where your poo is kind of sitting, it can be a bit kind of kinked. There's a bit of a kind of muscle that's like lassoing around that, which is meaning that it's a bit harder it's not like a direct, smooth exit. By raising your knees so that they are kind of in line with the rest of your body, so just popping your feet onto a stool, that's going to mean that pipe has got a nice, smooth, easy, you know, shoot out. A bit like those water theme parks, it's just going to go woo, woo and down. That can be one really simple trick that you can do for a nice, smooth exit.
And I would add, everyone, look at your poo. You can't pick up on changes in bowel habit, whether you're more constipated or whether your poo is properly formed and you're eating enough fibre, or if there's changes to that, maybe there's blood or mucus, things that you need to be aware of if you don't know what your poo looks like.
Absolutely. I'm like, we all need to talk about it. I also love that we're both saying poo, because I'm really big on the fact that as soon as we start saying stool and bowel habits, it becomes quite, you know,
it's like
clinical
your
and
hush-hush.
scary and hush-hush. It's like, oh, you know, we need to be really precious about this. I'm like, everybody poos.
I know, my partner Andrew always says to me, Frankie, I don't need to hear about your poo. And I'm like, it's quite normal to talk about in my industry.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. I think we should be talking about it because when we make these topics taboo, that is when people feel ashamed of their problems or they are hesitant to seek health advice.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
When we take a course of antibiotics, does that do damage to our gut health? Is that temporary, permanent? What can we realistically do to reverse that?
So I think there's kind of two routes with antibiotics really, and I know you know this as a doctor. It's like if you need to take antibiotics, they are often life-saving medication and we should absolutely take them. Yeah. And actually, if you're in a condition or something's happening, not taking those antibiotics in those time points, it's probably worse for your gut health because your body is just in a state of really needing something to help it recover. But then it's taking kind of excessive antibiotics when they're not needed. So, for example, like viral infections, like a common cough, really not going to do much in terms of helping to support your health. And what's then happening with these antibiotics is that, yes, they effectively tend to kill both the good and the bad problematic bacteria. What we see from a number of studies is that those changes in your microbiome can last up to kind of 3 to 6 months and potentially for some people a bit longer. So yes, that is something that's not ideal. But again, if you really need to take them, it's still better than to kind of solve what that issue is to start with. In terms of what we can do to help support our gut in that recovery, there's a lot of chat about probiotics. I generally tend to say, yes, there are good evidence for certain types of probiotics. So being very specific about, the name of the probiotics you're taking and the dose and the evidence behind it. That they can help to prevent what's called antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So they're going to stop you getting the squits if you tend to get that during taking antibiotics. But in terms of that recovery, we're still slightly in the Wild West in terms of probiotics. There's a lot of products out there. Most of them are with not necessarily much research behind them or not kind of strong evidence in terms of what they're claiming they can help with. And we've also seen some studies that have suggested that those probiotics may actually slow the recovery of after antibiotics. So it's not always a kind of net positive thing. Mm-hmm. So the thing I tend to say is actually let's go back to just helping the microbes you have in terms of feeding them the foods that they like to thrive on. That's going to help them to flourish, thrive, and make those molecules for your health. So that's really talking about fibre.
That takes us on really nicely to my next set of questions, which is all about how can we improve our gut health. We've talked about why it's important. We've talked about the daily things that may be damaging it. But there are so many things that we can proactively do to help our gut health. But it can feel so overwhelming with all the noise about gut health and what to eat, what not to eat. What does eating for your gut look like in real life?
I think it's been way overcomplicated, and really we just need to think about what are the kind of simple basics. And the key thing that we really need to talk about when we talk about your gut microbiome is fibre, which is this type of carbohydrate that your body itself can't digest, it can't break it down. We don't have the enzymes to kind of unlock and kind of break down the fibre particles. But what we do have is our gut microbes, which can break down fibre. And so what happens is this kind of plant fibre, and this is found in a range of different plants. It's not just brown, stodgy, bland food, which has had a bad PR reputation, poor fibre. We're talking about fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. And because fibre isn't broken down by your body, it's resistant to being broken down. I kind of call it like the rebel nutrient because, everything else is getting absorbed and it's like, nope, none of that. It's then landing on the kind of kitchen table of your gut microbes in your large intestine, and they're then feeding on that fibre. That's helping them to grow and thrive. And then particularly making those molecules, particularly those short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory and have kind of powerful actions for your health across your body.
What are some foods that people assume are high in fibre that are actually surprisingly low in fibre?
I always say that salad leaves is always like an interesting, surprising one because I think it feels fibrous. We're like chewing down on it. We're like, it gets...
Eating a leaf,
it takes time and you're gnawing away. But actually a bowl of salad, so let's say that's kind of 100 grams of salad leaves, a generous kind of bowl, that's only about 2 grams of fibre. Whereas if you think about beans, for example, that just kind of half a can of beans is about 7 grams of fibre. That's like a way smaller amount.
And a teaspoon of chia seeds.
Exactly. A tablespoon of chia seeds is about like 3-4 grams of fibre.
Yeah.
So you're really like, so I think I tend to talk a lot about what I call the BGBGs, which is like an easy, simple way to be like, okay, which are the high fiber hitters? Which are the ones I need to put in my shopping basket on a regular basis? And that's really a kind of acronym. So BGBGS. So that's beans, greens. So the green vegetables, a lot of them tend to be a bit high in fiber. So we're talking about peas, green beans, broccoli, kale. And then we've got B is berries. Berries in terms of fruit, anything that's got kind of little seeds in it. So thinking about raspberries, having those little seeds, strawberries, those seeds are pretty high in fiber. So anything that's kind of seedy in terms of fruit, quite often berries, tends to be high in fiber. And then we're talking about grains, as in whole grains, so things like oats, whole wheat pasta, rye bread, really great sources of fiber. And then we're talking about S being effectively a kind of shortened nuts and seeds. And again, really great source. So chia seeds, but also flax seeds, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, lots of different types of seeds.
That's really helpful. Thank you. We get told to consume 30 grams a day of fibre. And I think the UK average is actually that we eat 18 grams a day of fibre. So not even really half of the recommendation. Is 30 grams a day of fibre a ceiling, a target, or is more?
I think that's a really interesting pertinent question that I think even us researchers are asking. And actually one thing that we're looking at in terms of the study that we're running at King's College London at the moment is whether, should it be maybe 40 grams? And there's been a few other handful of studies that have looked at higher amounts. But really we still don't have like that much concrete research at those kind of higher amounts. A few really interesting studies, particularly in the kind of 1970s. But what we do see, because there is such a wealth of evidence around fibre and fibre being related to lower risks of many diseases, low risk of heart disease, low risk of type 2 diabetes, low risk of bowel cancer, that some of the research has been able to kind of, estimate if you were to have higher amounts, would that mean that that risk would continue to decrease? And it seems to be the case. So it might be that, 30 grams is just the kind of starting point. But I think even just to kind of couch that in the fact that, so many of us are struggling to meet our fibre, even just to get to that 30 grams, 96% of us aren't meeting our recommended amounts of fibre. And so even if 30 grams seems like quite kind of scary in terms of reaching, actually just increasing by 7 grams more in terms of what you eat already, that's really already seen to be related to significant lower risk factors in terms of heart disease, type 2 diabetes and bowel cancer. So just getting that little bit extra. And as I said, that 7 grams is kind of the equivalent of half a can of beans. I mean, that's just what you're adding in.
Fibre really does deserve the moment it's having, which is great. Yeah, it does. And I think for anyone listening that's super obsessed with protein, you can get protein from lots of great fibre sources. You mentioned there beans, nuts and seeds, chia seeds, all great sources of protein as well. So for anyone that's like centering their meal around protein, don't forget the high fibre source of protein as well.
Exactly. I think there's this difference between we've been so obsessed with protein and actually most of us are really meeting the protein we need. Maybe there's a benefit to having a little bit more, but we're not in this kind of crazy protein deficit as we made to think. Yet with fibre, we really are. We've got this really significant gap. Actually, the latest kind of nutrition survey that came out said we're kind of on average 16 grams of fibre. So just like really kind of just even less. And I think that all sounds quite doom and gloom, but I actually quite like to think that it's quite a positive thing. So I'm like, hold on, if 96% of us are really struggling with fibre, that's the really like clear one action that we can take that's going to have a big benefit for our health, because that's where the gap is.
Have you heard the term fibre maxing?
Yes.
What is fibre maxing? Should we be doing that?
So fibre maxing, I think, is when people are like, right, they're going to go and try and like have, as it sounds, as much fibre as they can possibly have. I would say that there's one thing to be very cautious of with that, in terms of if you try and eat too much fibre too quickly, and you go straight from zero to hero, you're jumping straight in at the deep end, that can actually give you some gut symptoms, not necessarily harmful, but it can be really uncomfortable. And that's just because your gut hasn't had time to adapt to this new kind of sources of fibre. Like, this is a kind of powerful, potent nutrient. And particularly your gut microbes as well. If they've been a kind of, it's like a feast or famine state. They've been like starving and hungry for ages. And then they're suddenly offered this massive kind of delicious, luscious table and feast. They are going to go absolutely bonkers and bananas. And part of them feeding on that kind of fibre and all those foods, yes, they make those molecules, but they also make gas as a side effect.
Don't we know it?
Yeah, don't we know it? So if your gut hasn't had time to adapt, that's also one thing where suddenly you feel very bloated. You might have a change in bowel habits, and that can put people off fibre. And it's really just because they've gone too fast too soon. So just start low, slowly ease it up. This is why in my book I have a kind of 4-week kind of plan to kind of slowly ease you into it. And little tips and tricks, like, as we said, about kind of poo position when you're on the loo, but also making sure that you're drinking enough as well, because fibre can act a bit like a sponge. So it needs water to work well.
Is it quite useful to soak your foods like chia seeds or soak your oats to make that viscous kind of texture? Is that going to boost the fibre?
So it won't necessarily like increase the fibre, but in terms of things like chia seeds in particular, one of those like really key ones where we do want to be effectively soaking it before it gets into the gut. The reason for that with chia seeds is that they absorb a lot of water. So if you're just having them dry, that can then absorb a lot of water in your gut and could potentially, worst case scenario, cause a bit of a blockage or just make things really dry and difficult to kind of pass through. So I tend to say if you're having chia seeds, mix them through. I love mixing them through with my yogurt in the morning with some flax seeds. Sometimes I add some hemp seeds. That's a really simple, easy way to like get your kind of 10 grams of fibre if you're pairing that with some nuts and seeds and some fruit. Or you add it to a smoothie.
Great idea. In your book, you just mentioned it, you talk about 10 gut brain hacks. Which 2 or 3 consistently make the biggest difference for most people?
I always go to what are the simple things, because people are like, oh, I know that, but I'm like, but are you doing it? Let me re-emphasize. But I also think sometimes it's nice just to have a reminder that actually it's the simple things that make the biggest difference. And we don't need to be stressing about this latest supplement or, there's this next kind of new kind of wave fad that's come in. So I really think, making half your plate vegetables is one of the best things that you can do. You can just eyeball it. You can just add a bit more veggies of what you've already made, or you can just like use some leftovers from the day before. Really simple trick that is going to really make a difference in terms of your long-term health if you're doing that consistently. I do think if we can be eating more fish, that could be a great thing for both our brain health, but also we think that the omega-3s, that kind of healthy fat that is in the salmon, that's actually seen as maybe being a kind of candidate probiotic, really kind of early insight into also helping to support your gut health, but kind of new emerging research there. And then I would say really the BGBGs, making sure that they're just a regular feature through your day, and being the things that when you go to the supermarket thinking, okay, have I kind of ticked these off of going into my shopping basket?
I think lots of people, when they hear how can you boost gut health, would jump straight to supplements like probiotics or fermented food. Are they essential or just a nice to add?
I would say nice to add. I would say there's more evidence around, it depends. For probiotics, if you're just taking them, you're generally well and healthy, and you're taking them as a kind of, fail-safe for your gut health, then I would think that money is actually better spent on just making eating more fibre easier for you. That could be things like getting a fruit and veg box, or like buying kind of ready cooked whole grains that you can then quickly add to a meal. It might be that you struggle to eat enough fruit, and just getting that ones that are kind of more in season and kind of better quality will kind of help encourage that. Where the evidence is for probiotics is when you have a certain condition or ailment that you're wanting help and support with, and then finding the particular type and name of that probiotic that has got evidence to help in that area. And then there might be some benefit there. In terms of fermented foods, so we're talking about things like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. A lot of the evidence really centers around kefir, kind of fermented milk. So there is some kind of interesting research and support there, but it could also be just you're having yogurt. You don't have to kind of always go for the kefir. I think the benefit of things like kimchi and sauerkraut and the kind of fermented veggies is that you're also getting the kind of plant compounds and the fibre with it. And there is research from Stanford University where they looked at people who were having, admittedly, a lot of fermented foods. So it was 7 servings a day. So it's quite a lot. And they found that the people who were on the kind of fermented food arm where their levels of inflammation decreased after kind of a number of weeks, and also their diversity of that gut microbiome kind of improved. So not to say we have to have 7 servings, but if you want to add it in, but I really see that fibre is, the foundation, and then add these things on top, because really it's like, what can we feed our microbes to start with?
Yeah, it's like when you have a meal, you want to feed yourself, but also your gut as well.
Yeah.
Beyond food, which everyday habits seem to have the biggest impact on gut health?
I think really just this like social interaction and social connection. We've got to remember that we live in a microbial world. They're all over us. They're on our skin. They're in the air around us. We actually have a microbial cloud that we're kind of constantly kind of surrounded by. Every surface we touch is microbial. It's in the air. And so even just kind of interacting with one another, we're passing microbes back and forth, whether that's sharing a meal, whether that's kind of kissing someone. If you kind of kiss someone for 10 seconds or more, have a smooch, a snog, you're transferring kind of 80 kind of billion microbes from one person's mouth to another. We don't know what the impact that is on your gut microbiome, but just to give a kind of an insight into how we are just constantly sharing these microbes back and forth.
I read somewhere that having a pet in the house boosts your gut microbiome.
So you do see similarities in the sense that if you have a pet and then some of their microbes that they have tend to then appear in the guts of their kind of owners. And so you see there's kind of similar types of microbes appearing.
Another reason getting a dog is a great decision. What is one gut health trend that you wish people would stop doing?
I think it would be, spending too much money on supplements. I think we've kind of covered that. I think I feel like you need to go on a kind of juice fast or kind of gut reset. I'm like, I don't think it's, your body is amazingly kind of complex and adaptable. And really it's just, again, like if anything sounds too wonderful and wacky, it usually is. There's no quick fixes, sadly. I wish, we always love to like click our fingers and it would all be wonderful. But if anyone's trying to sell you anything expensive, I would say for your gut health, you just don't need it. It really is those simple everyday factors. I'd love to just put people's mind at ease. If it's going to save you £10 or, £500, if you really want to support your health, think about it through your food. But also if you're having issues, please go see a doctor, go see a dietitian, and really get some support in terms of your health that way.
It's really refreshing advice. What is your vision of health? What does health look like to you?
I really see health as being that, if you think about your life being a puzzle and like all those different pieces, those pieces are kind of different days, and how kind of colourful and vibrant you feel that day, kind of all kind of pieced together. Yeah. So for me, that really is what health is. It's kind of making this puzzle, this tapestry of your life, feel as grounded and happy and stable and healthy and energetic as you possibly can.
You really are the queen of analogies. I've really enjoyed them in this episode. Dr. Emily Leeming, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Vision of Health. I hope this episode has helped you feel a little more informed and empowered and given you some realistic takeaways that you can apply to your own life to help you get clearer on your own vision of health. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you left a review, subscribed to the channel, and shared this episode with someone who might enjoy it too. It genuinely helps support the podcast and it allows us to keep having these conversations. And as always, thank you for being part of the Vision of Health community. I'll see you in the next episode.